Welcome to week 3. I thought today, instead of doing introductions and things, since this is our 3rd week, maybe if anybody wanted to share an aha moment or something related to computer science that piqued your interest over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'll say that I've never played with Scratch and I'm just having fun playing with it. And I know so little. It's like usually I'm really comfortable with just knowing that my students know more than I do. In this case, they know so much more. It's like I don't know how much I need to learn in order to do anything related to computer science with them. But it's fun. I can see why kids like doing this kind of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Hi. I would say too that looking at your lessons that you pushed out last week, that it doesn't need to be necessarily, it doesn't necessarily need to be something that's like super techie in order for it to be computer science, which I really liked and saw a lot more ways to embed it into the classroom.
Awesome. Yeah, that's one of the things we hope to get across, that you're probably doing a lot of this already, at least thinking this way and teaching kids to think in computational thinking types of ways, in computer science types of ways.
And I have to say, if it's any encouragement, my high school computer science teacher did not know computer science. He was the football coach that they made teach computer science. And it was really good because we worked in teams, and as a class, we pretty much taught ourselves how to do computer science. And looking back, it was very motivational for us.
Yeah, that's actually not unusual. So I do a lot of training of high school computer science teachers, and we found, just as a general rule, it's more important to be a good teacher than to know anything about computer science. Because if you can keep the students engaged and working together collaboratively, they can figure out a lot of the other material. Certainly, if you know it, you can teach it to them, but it's not a thing you need to know in depth to teach.
Welcome, Sarah and Amy. We're just sharing any aha moments you've had over the last couple of weeks before we dive into week 3.
I think for me, it's very similar to what Jamie said, just seeing all of the unplugged activities and even the Scratch, like I've been playing with that as well, but like breaking it down, it's not as like I hear computer science and everything in me is like, oh my gosh, I'm not smart enough for that. But seeing it broken down like that, I feel like is really like, it makes me excited to present it to my students and for them to get excited about it and not feel like this huge, crazy, overwhelming thing that like is too much. I just can't even, comprehend it.
Yeah, thank you. That well, I was going to say I don't know why computer science gets that rap, but I actually do know why computer science gets that rap, and it has to do with a lot of history. But I'm glad to hear that we've been breaking it down.
I just like figuring out all the integration activities. So like not thinking I have to have like this whole separate block to do all of this stuff, but like I was doing one of the grid activities and I was like, this is perfect for our map unit. And so just like ways that we can get it into like pre-existing units without having to have like a separate time for it.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're hoping for.
Both because it makes your life easier and because it means the material sticks more if it's connected to other thoughts. So that's the better way to teach.
All right, well, I'm going to share my screen. Thank you so much for sharing. We are into week 3, which is really about creating equitable CS experiences. So week 1, intro to computer science concepts. Week 2, some computer science sort of specific strategies, although you saw they can be used other places. These strategies are also ones that are not necessarily just for computer science, but there are some unique things related to computer science because it is right now a field that is very white male dominated. There are sort of extra things that we want to do to make it more welcoming and inclusive. So we talked a little bit about what's wrong the first week and shared some stats. This is a slide from Shana White, who's a computer science teacher. She's now at the Kapor Institute And they're doing a lot of culturally relevant, responsive, sustaining kind of pedagogy. But I really like this image that she shared at a conference last year about how, you know, these, especially just the posters, like if you're just putting up posters about feeling good and being inclusive, like that's not enough. You have to go to sort of the next level. And then she shared some other stats about the makeup of K-12 teachers. 81% are white, 51% of computer science teachers are male. And that compares with, I think, a very similar stat to how many are women. So sort of because the field is mostly women, when you go to computer science, males are still overrepresented there because they make up 50%. And then this stat about Hispanic, Black, and female students never have been told by a teacher that they would be good at computer science. So Jenny and I did a presentation at CSTA last week on this very topic. And I remember a teacher shared this, and Sarah, you might remember this quote as well, but it really, you know, so it sort of spoke to me. Like there's all these external factors that we can't control, but, you know, this quote, I've come to the frightening conclusion, I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated and a child humanized or dehumanized. So the kind of things that we're going to be talking about today are really kind of personal things and things that we as individuals sort of have to make conscious efforts to do. And then another thing I really loved is when Jenny shared this framework of, so researchers use this framework of how teacher professional knowledge works with classroom practice, works with student outcomes, and how there are these amplifiers and filters in the form of teacher beliefs, orientation, prior knowledge, and context that impact all that. So, you know, we can have this professional knowledge, but we still have things that might amplify that for students or filter that for students because of, you know, things we believe, biases, stuff like that. And so I see there's a lot going on in the chat, so please do interrupt me because I can't see anything. So I like this, we're going to sort of share two different lenses into creating equitable experiences. One is culturally responsive teaching practices, which you probably already have a lot of familiarity with. And so we'll kind of try to frame it in the computer science context. And then there's a set of equitable computer science teaching strategies that Luther and a set of colleagues have investigated and used in workshops with high school and community college faculty to help them increase diversity in their classes. And so we've kind of taken those strategies and we're trying to apply them in a K-8 setting. So the culturally responsive teaching practices provide one way to bridge cultural gaps and address many inequities faced by minoritized students in the educational system. It really puts students in the center of the teaching and learning. And there's three basic buckets that we're looking at: helping students maintain their cultural identity, providing students a variety of ways to demonstrate their learning, and incorporating their cultural knowledge and orientation into the curriculum. And if you would like to sort of see where you fall in the spectrum of practices related to cultural responsive teaching, there's a self-efficacy sort of thing. And that's actually been part of the responses in the pre and post surveys that we've also been doing to kind of see where that is. So under the category of help students maintain their cultural identity in CS, one of the things you can do is meet students where they are. It's not just about learning enough about their culture to bring them into yours, but to continue to help them continue teaching them in their own culture. And anybody, please feel free to interrupt me. Students feel like important members of the computer science community. So once they feel this ownership, they're going to help you grow the diversity and inclusion. And this is something that we really found pretty powerful in St. Anne's when we sort of built that program up from scratch. The more sort of empowerment of the students and help and getting them to help drive what we did and how we did it really helped increase the diversity that we were seeing in the classrooms, especially when it became something in high school where they had to select into it. This is also a reason that you don't have to know everything, especially if you're just starting to integrate CS. You're going to be able to really rely on students to help you learn, and they're going to help, that'll help them become experts sort of in this field and make them feel very valuable and important. And then we want to make sure we're valuing students from diverse backgrounds and valuing their backgrounds. So we want to provide students a variety of ways to demonstrate their CS learning. Assessment is not one size fits all in CS. And one of the great things about doing computer science in elementary and middle school is that you don't really have to assess them. The way you can look at how their understanding is really through the work that they are doing with projects. Doing project-based stuff is really great for computer science, and it's a great way to look and see sort of where the students are. They're going to be in a wide spectrum in K-8 because they'll have different experiences sort of outside and inside school. And that's really okay. It's really okay at that age, at that level, to provide differentiation and provide different ways for sharing what you know. So this is something I really appreciated. Mark Gusdile is a computer science professor who I follow. He has a big presence on Twitter and does a lot of blogging. And he also totally admits when he gets things wrong. So in 2019, there was this new AP CS principles class that was sort of an entry into computer science. And his guess was it would have no impact on CS or STEM majors. And then in 2020, he realized that maybe it's not the amount of programming that's critical, but whether students come out of the course saying, I can do this, I can program. So it's hugely important that you can help students gain that confidence. And again, it's not the number of lines they program or where they are on the spectrum of attaining computer science and programming skills. And then finally, incorporating students' cultural knowledge into the curriculum. This is probably one of the most challenging aspects of the 3 pillars. So you want to make sure that lessons represent students' culture. Often lessons are created in a way that represents the mind and culture of the teacher creating the lesson, and that's unlikely to match your students' culture. So think about their culture and how you can adjust your lessons or design changes to them to more accurately represent the cultures of your students. Talking to students about their cultures and getting ideas from them is a great first step. Lessons appeal to students' interests. This is a powerful way to tap into the students' intrinsic motivation, and embracing the experimentation culture of CS is a great opportunity for you to find out where their interests are. So any part of a project that can have more of an exploratory experimentation phase, then you can pay attention to what it is they're most interested in, where they're drawn to, and kind of make adjustments to your lessons based on that. And then you want to make sure that lessons don't reinforce negative stereotypes. And we're going to be talking more about that in the next part. So I'm going to hold off on that. And then you want to help identify impacts of societal issues and perceptions of diverse people in the tech field. And this is a broad topic that is often can be customized to each individual student. And what students feel about society at large and tech in general perceives about them and their family will impact how they're interacting and their level of willingness to engage with CS. So the better you understand it, the better you can respond appropriately. So that is sort of the culturally responsive teaching lens. And Luther, I'm going to let you drive the equitable teaching strategies. Do you want me to continue doing the slides, or do you want to take over?
Oh, why don't you keep going?
Okay.
So-
I was gonna, sorry, can I just interject something really
Yes.
quickly, Luther? Because what I hear a lot of questions are, here's some guidelines, like what does that actually look like in a lesson? So if I'm gonna try to incorporate students' cultural knowledge, like how can I handle that when every student is coming in with their own, from their own backgrounds, right? And so I don't know if that was a question that's going through your head, but that usually goes through my head. And so what I really like to do, just one aspect or one thought would be, because it's experimental and because it's kind of problem solving, asking, like Kim was saying, asking students about, well, what are some problems in your community? What are some problems that you're interested in? We're going to create a storyboard. What is a book that you like reading with your parents or with your grandparents or with your family? Sorry, I should say families. Or communities at home, right? And we'll do some storyboards at that. And so enabling students to kind of do their own project within sort of a larger framework is one way that you can help sort of incorporate students' cultural knowledge and privilege that knowledge in the classroom.
Yeah, I'll also comment, it's okay if you ask them about their interests and they pick something and you have no idea how to make a computer help with that. If you can just sort of imagine a world where a computer might help with that with them. The fact that it may take them years to develop that ability is not important. They'll catch on to that. So for example, I once had a student from Iran who had multiple members of her family murdered because there was a lot of murder in the city she was from at the time. And she said, I want to be able to fix this problem. And I said, well, let's imagine how a computer could do it. We talked for 20 minutes about ideas about computer systems that might assist in tackling this challenge. None of them were anywhere within scope. But she then got excited. And then when we went to do the basic things we were doing, she saw how this would lead to a goal in the end that she valued. And she valued me for having listened and understood her situation. All right. With that said, so we're now going to switch to a different lens. Why do we have two lenses? Actually, back up slide, Kim. Why do we have two lenses? They sort of come from different approaches to thinking about how to serve a broader pool of students. So culturally responsive teaching practices are based sort of start with the assumption we want students to feel comfortable who they are. We don't want to have them to become somebody new to succeed. Equitable teaching strategies come from a complementary but distinct lens of saying, I want to understand how my instruction can be well received by people with different background, different experiences, and so forth. So we'll go forward. We're going to talk about 5 specific such strategies. There's going to be supplementary videos that explain these in more depth. I'll just talk about them fairly briefly. But the 5 strategies we're going to talk about are dealing with implicit, or I guess the problems initially is going to be implicit bias, which is where your brain has biases that you are unconscious of or don't intend. Stereotype threat, which is where your awareness of stereotypes about you can impede your performance. Pigeonholing, which is where people end up being assigned tasks that match the stereotypes about them instead of getting a uniform distribution of tasks. Imposter syndrome, which is where your brain tells you you aren't good at something or don't belong in it, despite evidence to the contrary. And differential preparation, which is a broad category that basically deals with the idea that we build knowledge on other knowledge, and not everybody has the same baseline starting knowledge. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of these in this session, and then we'll have some more videos that will dive deeper into them this week. So let's start with implicit bias. Implicit bias is based on the idea that your brain can learn. So let's start with a positive implicit bias. If you drive, sometimes you usually don't have to think about how you're driving. You'll just drive. If you know how to drive, you can just drive down the road. But every once in a while, your brain will remind your conscious mind that was thinking about something else. There's something unexpected and wrong in the road ahead of you. The way your brain does this in BASIC is it notices patterns in the world and flags as wrong or needing intervention anything that doesn't match your expectations. So your subconscious isn't able to tell whether something unusual in the road is good or bad. but it knows it requires attention, and so it sort of flags the warning signals in your brain. Unfortunately, this is not restricted to things like unfortunate things being in the road. Your brain can also look at a person and say, they look like a computer scientist, or they don't. They look like they'll be good at this or bad. When consciously you know a person's facial structure and so forth has no bearing on their intellectual ability, your subconscious has still noticed patterns in the kinds of people you see engage in different activities and uses that to bias your decisions. Okay. Now, if it always brought your conscious mind into play, that would be okay. We could fix it because our conscious mind could tell us, this doesn't really matter. But if we're busy, if our brain is full of other things, then the implicit biases of subconscious machinery will generally take over and help influence decisions. So for example, when there's a bunch of hands up in the class, there are too many students for you to consciously think about each one and who would be the right one to call on. So it's like your implicit biases will dictate who you call on for which kind of questions, because your brain is full and they exist. So what can you do about these? Strategy number one is become aware of your own implicit biases. These are automatically developed by your subconscious as a result of living in the world. So you need to figure out how they exist. There's various strategies you can use for this. There are websites and tests that you can take to try to help you understand your implicit biases. Another thing I sometimes find useful is to just ask myself, would I ever be surprised at the casting of a particular actor in a role in a movie? If some particular person be surprising to have that role, that suggests I have an implicit bias about who belongs in that role. Lots of things we can do to understand them. Second, it's a little strategy of mental proxy in your decisions. Ask yourself what somebody else would do. Your brain has mechanisms to combine a whole lot of different inputs, conscious and subconscious, in making decisions. But if you imagine somebody else and ask what they would do, it creates inside your brain sort of a filter to pull out the good ones that you would assign to that person. So instead of just picking somebody to do something or deciding how to react to somebody's request or so on, you can ask yourself what somebody else you admire would do in this situation. And that will cause your brain to filter through the decisions and make a more equitable decision in general. Third is to create a systematic process to make decisions. If a kind of decision is going to recur, if you can create a fair system to make it, that will save your brain needing to make it based on your biases. So for example, pulling names out of a cup for calling on people and so forth is fair in some sort of objective sense. And you can spend the time to develop a process that can save you from having to make that in the moment. And it's useful to promote a growth mindset and an experimentation culture. A growth mindset, this idea that knowledge is developed, not innate, will tend to decrease the impact of implicit biases. Implicit biases will still exist, but they'll give you this conscious reminder that what really matters is experience and how much somebody has learned rather than who they are. And the experimentation culture will also help with that because it will cause you to sort of separate an intermediate failure from a long-term sort of decision about how good somebody is. So we'll talk some more about these again in some of the subsequent videos. But this is how we handle, or some ideas for handling implicit biases that we all have because our brains work. The next problem we need to understand is stereotype threat. Stereotype threat occurs when you're aware of a negative stereotype about people like you in the context of what you are doing. There's various rationales why this might occur, but the basic result is because you're aware that the public at large thinks you will be bad at something. This will increase your internal anxiety levels and reduce how much attention you can devote to the task at hand, which will in turn impede your performance. And thus makes the stereotypes to some degree look like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So 3 basic strategies we're going to suggest for reducing stereotype threat. And again, we'll talk some more about these in one of the videos. But the first one is just try not to raise stereotypes. Now, when we talk about equitable and responsive teaching, we want to engage students in their culture. And that's absolutely true. We want them to feel comfortable being who they are. We don't want to connect that who they are with stereotypes about people who they are related to the task we're doing. Or if we really need to have that conversation, we want to try to separate it in time and space from sort of when they're going to be doing that activity. We don't want them to be thinking about the stereotypes while they're working. We also want to not make them feel like they are in sort of a deficit. Okay, so we don't want to talk about their minoritized group in a deficit manner. So when we're talking about the culture and the benefits they bring, that's great. When we talk about them being underrepresented or not having a great say in things or so forth, that will tend to raise some of these stereotype threat kinds of activities. And a counterintuitive for many people result of this is to avoid myth busting. One of the fastest ways to create the presence of a stereotype in another's mind is to tell them it is false. If I say, for example, I know you've heard people with small feet can't swim well, but it's false. They can swim just as well as people with big feet. What I have communicated to you is that so many people thought small feet were bad at swimming that it was worth my while to tell you it was false. And so I've successfully communicated my belief that the stereotype exists, even if you've never thought about it before. And therefore I can create an environment for stereotype threat if I raise a stereotype for the purpose of saying it is false. So it is worthwhile providing counter stereotypical evidence, discussing the contributions of people who are in the minority in their field and so forth. But it's not worth doing to bring up the stereotype and then say it is false, because that can create this stereotype threat environment.
Luther, can I just interject with an example that I used to do all the time, and now I don't because of this? So girls are good at programming too. Yeah, I didn't realize I was implying that some people think that girls are not good at programming. So it's really easy to do.
Yeah, and it's really easy to do in part because we have those implicit biases, right? Our brains know what the pattern is and think it's remarkable when the pattern doesn't hold. And so we tend to say things like, you're good at this too, suggesting it was noteworthy. So thank you for that. All right. The third problem we're going to talk about is pigeonholing.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Oh, please, yes.
So what do you recommend we do in class when students bring up these stereotypes or mention them? Like, and you know, like just put a question out there and then the whole stereotype is out there for the class at large.
Yes. So my recommendation, let me just comment. I don't know of research-backed best practices in that situation. But the plurality of experience seems to suggest a good response is to first be to react with surprise that people would bring it up. Okay, just as I would react with surprise if somebody said that their astrological sign meant they would be bad at some subject, because why would you believe that, right? So too I should act with surprise if they bring up some racial or sexual or the like indicator. I shouldn't act like I've never heard it before, because lying to your students is never a good idea. But we should set a baseline expectation that we understand that learning and experience results in positive results. I then also find it useful to pose it in that growth mindset space. So if somebody says that some group is bad at them, or I don't think I can because I am, these kinds of statements, I usually then try, after expressing surprise, they bring it up, I will then pose it in the comment like, why do you have that impression? It's probably because you've seen fewer people like that in the field. But the reason you've seen fewer people like that in the field is because fewer of them have had the opportunities and the experience to learn those skills. And that's why we're teaching you all those skills, so that you will have that experience and be able to do as well as others. And that conversation will tend to go well. You're welcome to bring up additional information if you want. But again, that isn't quite the same as myth busting, right? You're not raising the stereotype to say it's false. You're responding to an environment where it's been brought up. Does this help?
It does help. I'm reminiscing about some particular conversations. Like we really struggled this year in my 5th grade math science class with girls complaining actively that they felt shut out by boys in sports things that were happening outdoors, in conversations that were happening in class, that there was like quite a bit of gender bullying. And I'm trying to, you know, like, and they would connect it to women not doing as much math and science because it was something that was discussed in class. Maybe I was doing some of that bad stereotype talk, like, or that, you know, like we would talk about those deficits sometimes. So I'm just, I'm trying to think about how to frame those conversations in a way where I'm letting my female students be heard in their frustration and have the chance to express themselves, how they, because they're talking about actively feeling shut out, right, by other students, and connecting it with a through line to things that happen in the future. But like, I don't know exactly what to tell them except like, yeah, you know, keep fighting. We'll all keep fighting. But I don't know what, you know, it's just, I don't know what the exact right tack is. And I know I've done it wrong before.
I just, when I don't have an answer, I just try to validate. So if I hear girls saying things like that, I'll be like, that is a really great point. I felt that way too. It makes me feel good to know that we're thinking about the same things. I wish I had an answer for you. Do you need a space to talk about it? You know, just to say like, I don't have any answers, but I'm considering the same things.
Another thing I've sometimes done, depending on how I think the conversation will go, how engaged I think the student will be, we'll sometimes talk about why people tend to try to shut out people that aren't like them. There is a rational reason where it is easier to get on with people who have more similarities with you. You have more shared cultural cues, communication is easier. And that rationality can then lead to a desire to feel special, right? So this initial people like me, I will get along with more easily. And then I want to be special, so I'm going to put down the people that aren't like me is a natural human emotion. And learning to deal with it is a part of developing as a person and learning to live in a community. And so so these things happen and we expect to see them around. They do not mean there is any deficit of ability. They instead are a sort of a grouping that humans engage in. That isn't always the right conversation to have. And my instinct, without a lot of experience, is that the younger the students are, the less likely that would be the right conversation, but I don't know that. I haven't spent a lot of time dealing with younger students. But I will definitely second what Sarah says, right? This sense of we are in this together instead of this is something you are struggling with alone can do a lot to make a lot of problems less stressful.
Right. I was just, the only concern that I have is like, I have this fear that by like when I'm validating them, which feels like a natural impulse, right, to stand in allyship with the students who are angry about how they're being treated or about how they're being stereotyped. There's really no way to validate that it's happening without acknowledging that the stereotype exists, right? Like that's the part that I was struggling with. And I think that you're right, Luther. I like that idea of acting surprised and maybe even having that conversation like, why would that even be something that people might think? Like, are our brains different in substantial ways related to problem solving, right? And then sometimes they'll say, yes, they are, because my brain cares about other people.
I was just gonna say, I do feel like you can maybe take, or they're two different issues here. And like you're saying, I feel like the students are connecting them. Like there might be some feeling of bullying in the classroom. And then students are also connecting that to the stereotype, right? Which, I mean, totally makes sense, but in addressing it, it might be good to maybe tackle in parts as well.
Remember, a stereotype is a phenomenon that comes when you think the world at large believes something about you. So if I had a group of students where, I don't know, all of those who parted their hair instead of leaving it without a part decided that they were better than the ones who did part their hair or something, I wouldn't think there was a stereotype, and I would never talk about it as if the world at large believed this. It was just a weird quirk of that group. So you can address social inequities in your classroom without ever suggesting they're related to worldwide social inequity. Of course, if there is a worldwide social inequity and they bring it up, that's fine to address, right? But you don't need to suggest that there is a widely understood or widely believed difference in ability.
Can I add to this by chance?
Yeah.
I don't know if I really connected with what Amy was saying. I you know, as an educator, like you're always challenged of trying to figure out, well, what is the right thing to say and how is the right way to handle this, you know, because obviously equity is, truly extremely important. And I sometimes, when I have a student in my class that brings up frustrations, like what Amy was saying, it's like, I don't know if what I'm doing is correct either, but sometimes my kids like to feel that connectivity with their teacher. And sometimes I think it's very valuable for a teacher to talk about a time in which they felt, in which they were dealt a situation where that was not equitable, or they were in a situation where they were made to feel not as good as or less than, and helping the kids understand how to problem solve and how to overcome and how to think about, use that, turn a negative into a positive and use that for a motivational piece. I mean, I don't know if that is something that necessarily is ideal, but I mean, I sometimes, I mean, I've gotten positive feedback from students when you help stand alongside them and connect with them by talking about your own personal experiences. Obviously, only if it's appropriate, but that's just a thought. I mean, I was curious as to what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, this is a good practice, right? And I also sympathize with an undercurrent here. You face hard challenges where it's not obvious what the right thing to do is. We all do. And we do our best, and sometimes it was the best thing that could be done, and sometimes it wasn't. That's okay. The fact that we're trying will make a positive impact. And as we keep trying, we'll learn more what works for us and what doesn't. Because some of this will be how you can relate to the students. What I can deliver in a way that students understand may be different than what you can deliver in a way that students will understand. There's some level of learning as we go along, and not getting too worked up. One mistake won't ruin a student's life, right? If we don't do it right the first time, we keep going, we grow, and they will grow as well.
Yeah, and I think just to
I don't know if I could jump.
One of the things that we suggest is you're not going to choose, again, this is a smorgasbord of strategies, and we're not expecting you to incorporate them all, but we do suggest, if you're picking one or two, afterwards reflect what went well, what didn't go well, what can I change next time? So you're always improving upon.
Yeah. Sinead?
I want to validate too. I do think women think differently than men. I think there are differences, but it's not bad differences, right? Like, I feel like when I was a computer scientist, what I brought to the table were things very, very different than my white male colleagues. And it's also trying to learn how to stand on that and say, like, I'm different, but I'm also right. Like, my approach to these problems are completely different and correct. Going back to the first slides, like helping students maintain their cultural identity. I think it's not like not bullying, but it's okay to let those, like, we think differently, we're different, go, like, in a way that everybody's respected though. Like, I solved this math problem this way, and that's okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is an excellent point. Part of the way that we are successful in getting people who do not intrinsically care about social justice engaged in promoting diversity is by pointing out hundreds of research problems that show that a diverse team will arrive at more innovative and successful solutions than a homogeneous team. Because that diversity of background, that diversity of thinking, whether it's biological or cultural or whatever it is, just that diversity of thought will benefit the process of developing solutions and making the world better. So thank you for that as well. Okay. There's more we could say about this, certainly, but I do want to get through the other two problems we wanted to talk about and preview what's coming up for the rest of the week. So let's jump into pigeonholing. Pigeonholing occurs when the same student is given the same role over and over again. It's a big problem when you do group work. So what will commonly happen is when you group students up and ask them to work on something, they will split the roles between themselves. And they're likely initially to split the roles based on stereotypes, because they have no other reason to do things. And so their implicit biases will say, you look like somebody who will be better at this, and you look like somebody who will be better at that. And once they've done that, even just once or twice, then the rational role of giving it out to the expert, the person with the most experience will reinforce that initial stereotype conforming distribution. And so the more you allow decisions either ad hoc or based on experience or ability, the more and more people end up pigeonholed, typecast into one particular role. And so how do you handle this? When you're allowing group work, which is strongly encouraged, especially in computing, but in general, first, divide the labor and assign groups with some sort of explicit systemic process. So if you're going to have a group that's working and one of them is responsible for creating the art and one is responsible for creating the logic or whatever it is, know what the roles are and assign them out to individuals rather than allowing them to select their own. In some process that will make sure there's an even distribution of these roles. You should avoid assigning roles based on experience or volunteers. Because again, both of those will tend to align with the stereotypes and end up with people gaining experience that aligns with what the culture writ large or your own implicit biases would put them in, as opposed to what they would benefit the most from. And a particular practice, we talked last week a little about pair programming and buddy programming. These are important when you're doing these kinds of group works as well. This is why pair programming has the driver navigator roles with switching which one is which, to try to keep things going. If you're allowing the less formal buddy programming, you do need to keep a watch on it and make sure it doesn't devolve into one person does the work and the other copies, but remains an equitable sharing, to try to avoid having people overfit without having the experience of learning everything beforehand. And the last of these we want to address is imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is a near universal experience where people feel like they are an imposter in the space they are in. They don't feel like they belong. Some people have this all the time. Some people have it just once in a while, but virtually everybody has it and will keep having it even once they're experts in their field. There are many people who are like name brand famous people in their field who have expressed feeling imposter syndrome in their own field. So there's a lot more that we could say about this than we will, but there's two practices that are worth doing in your classrooms. First, help students see evidence of their success. Show them they have learned. Point out how much more they know than they used to know. Help them become aware of successes. Okay? And don't judge them. Provide a safe, judgment-free environment. Remember, they are growing and developing, and they will make some mistakes in the process of growth. And you don't want to in any way suggest that those early mistakes have judged them as being unable to do things. The last thing we want to talk about as we're thinking about problems is differential preparation. There are a lot of different kinds of preparations that we assume our students have, such as being able to speak the same language as us, so that we can communicate with them and build new ideas, what they've learned in their previous classes and so on. Computing in particular has a really big one that is typically not taught. Throughout computing, there tends to be a very strong dependence on something called spatial reasoning. We see this at many different levels. So if you've played with Scratch, you just pause and think about it. Scratch involves moving blocks around physically in some two-dimensional space. The more developed your brain's ability is to remember and manipulate two-dimensional layout, the more easily you'll learn Scratch. If you go to text-based programming, you may think, well, if you write it in text, that doesn't matter, but we still have physical layout, and almost all of the official terms in computing have spatial terms. So we don't talk about a repetition, we talk about a loop, this visual analogy for something repeating, and so on for just about everything in the entire field. It's a very spatial heavy field. And spatial reasoning is generally something that is not taught explicitly. Instead, it's something that students learn primarily through their leisure activities. And the leisure activities that develop spatial reasoning tend to be roughly aligned with the stereotypes about computing, as well as with affluence. So many spatial reasoning type of activities require physical toys like blocks and so forth, or are associated with like maze-oriented video games or the like that have a correlation with other stereotypes. And so your students will tend to come in with different levels of this as well as other things. So be aware of this. Pay attention to it. What should you do about it? When you notice it, you should try to intervene. Unfortunately, at the different levels you're dealing with and so forth, I don't necessarily have best practices here. Practice and teaching can certainly help, But also if you notice that somebody seems to be forgetting where things are, that isn't a sign they're bad at programming, right? And giving them a little extra time and reminders and practice with that so they can develop that spatial skill in addition to the computing skill can help them develop the computing skill, which truly is a separate skill. It just tends to be learned via the spatial avenue. So be careful of the illusions and vocabulary you use. If you can give them more experience using physical things instead, or doing more unplugged type of activities, this can assist. The farther you go in computing, the more you need to think about this. And if any of you are teaching sort of text-based programming or the like, I'm happy to have a conversation maybe in office hours about how you can use manipulatives and so forth to try to make that go more smoothly. This is another thing to be aware of. So those were the 5 problems, and we'll have some more videos on each of them, right? This implicit bias, your brain sometimes wants to do the wrong thing. Stereotype threat, this idea that being aware of a negative stereotype about you can impede your performance. Pigeonholing, you'll tend to put people in the same roles if they haven't thought about if you aren't conscious about doing other things. Imposter syndrome, everybody feels inadequate sometimes. And differential preparation, sometimes bad performance is not caused by lack of ability, but by starting at the wrong point. And we'll talk some more about these in the videos this week. As Kim mentioned though, this plus all of the culturally responsive teaching, there's way more than you can do all at once. So pick a few and work on them, and then come back later and learn some others. Don't overwhelm yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luther. So we just want to remind you about office hours. I've got a couple that are interested now, so I'm very excited about that. And after this week, we know that you're going to be continuing working on some things and then bringing it to your classroom. So please reach out to me. I can help connect with others and also meet with you as well as you're getting closer to bringing this to the classroom. But again, we have the office hours this week. And then, oh, I just made this go away. So also this is our wrap up week and it seems really fast now. If you don't get everything wrapped up this week, that is okay. We're keeping the Canvas open through at least August for submitting things. So you'll be able to do that. But what we're looking for sort of as at the workshop wrap up is that you make a plan for your CS Infused lesson and share it in a Google form. So that's what this share it here is. If you have the ultimate goal is that you'll have 2 lessons. That's sort of the commitment for being part of the cohort. But for this summer, because things were a little crazy, we just kept it at sort of focus on 1 lesson if you want to. But so if you just worked on 1 lesson, that's great. Still share it through the form and then complete the post-workshop survey. If you're CS Institute and you want the PD credits, you'll send me the lesson plan and also do the post-workshop survey.
I don't have a question, but can I like spam everybody for a minute? If you are looking to explore CS, but do not necessarily have robotics or things to explore with, I work for a technology company that offers free demos of robots and physical computing devices. So if you do not have the budget or the resources and you still want to learn and play, I'll put my email in the chat. And I promise I won't try to sell you anything. I'm not in sales. It's just a great opportunity to get your hands on something and try to work with it.
And these are robots that I love, so I 100% endorse.